All right, so we're going to be moving on to the next segment in our show, and that is the DollFAM topic choice question, where I put up this post on my Facebook page, and you guys leave some questions below, and then I try to answer all of them throughout several episodes before I make another post, because when I make this post, a lot of people leave a lot of comments, and I try to answer them until the post kind of goes dead and there's not any new comments really being posted as it kind of falls down my page. And then when I notice that I'm not getting any more questions and I've answered them all, I make a new post and I get new questions. So this week I'm going to answer the kind of favorited question that's always on these posts, and it has to do with my car, and it has to do with like me talking about cars in general, vintage cars, car shows, my car. So I'm going to be doing those ones for all you gearheads out there that love it when I talk about my car. Please know that if you don't know already, I have a 1959 Edsel Ranger, and I do have pages where I post strictly car content, my projects, photos of my car, talking about my car, all nothing but car related things, and that is under the tagline, "That's a Ford Edsel Ranger." Do not try to come for me about the fact that I put the word Ford in there. I am more than aware that it is not a Ford Edsel Ranger, that is just an Edsel Ranger. But first and foremost, it's a joke. My tagline is a joke based off of a TikTok that was viral for a while that was absolutely hilarious. Me and my husband were joking about when I was getting my car, and "That's a Ford Edsel Ranger" just kind of fell in there, and it was super funny, and I was like, that's unique, I'm gonna use it. And now it's like one of those things that triggers purists because they're like, it's not a Ford. And it's like, yes, it is. Yes, who made it? Did Chevy make it? Did Chevy make it? Or did Ford fund the Mel division? Who funded the Mel division? Did Chevy? Did Chevy Ford? Huh? Who? Chevy or Ford? Who was it? Ford? Ford funded the Mel division? Okay, then it is a Ford Edsel Ranger. It is not a Chevy Edsel Ranger. And I think one of the funniest things is I always have to make sure I tell them, listen. I don't tell people this is a Ford Edsel Ranger. I tell them this is an Edsel Ranger. And then they say, well, what the heck is that? I've never seen or heard of that. And I'm like, oh, you haven't? You haven't? You've never heard of that? Well, unfortunately, the purists say that I can't tell you who makes it. Just leave it at that? No, I'm gonna say, well, it's a product of Ford. Ford is its birth right. Ford put together the Mel division, and the Mel division was a team that focused solely on very specific car models that Ford was focusing on, and they had their own division. They came out on their own without the Ford branding all over them, but they are a Ford product. Ford manufactured them. They are the ones that funded and put together the division that put them on the streets for us to all enjoy. So I think that it would be really a disservice to Edsel history if I didn't say, well, Ford is the person, the whole mama company that gave us the sweetness that is an Edsel. Chevy didn't fucking do it, did they? Did they? No, they didn't. So when I went to a car show once, it's a quick story. I went to a car show, and there was a gentleman there who showed up that wanted me to take pictures with his car. And this was just a local show that me and my family went to, but me being me, everybody was like, oh, you look really cool. You're all dressed up really cool. Can I take a picture of you with my car? Because if you're at a car show, guys like to take pictures of pinup girls with their cars. It's peanut butter and jelly, right? And I was like, yeah, for sure. And he had a Volkswagen that he unfortunately completely wrapped in JJ Watt sticker. I'm not talking shit. I'm not like, that's his taste, that's his car, so more power to him in the dedicated, passionate choices that he made. But let's just say I wasn't surprised when he said, well, what's your favorite car? And I said an Edsel, and he didn't know what that was. So a lot of people don't even know Edsels existed. They don't know what they are. Edsels were only produced for 3 years, and so I think that it would be a disservice to not let people know like more of where they came from. And Ford is is a big part of that. So if you don't like Ford being interjected, are you embarrassed about where you came from? Huh? Because I'm not. I will proudly say that Ford is the manufacturer that gave us the gift of Edsel. So proudly. But let's get in to these questions, shall we? Alrighty. So Ron asked, why a Ford Edsel? What was the attachment there, if any? When they came out, they were considered a flop and not attractive to some. In your opinion, what are some of the things that you like about them and some that you don't? Me, I kind of like cars that aren't everywhere or not so mainstream. I had and owned a few misfits, as I call them, a 1969 Mercury Montego MX, a 1978 Mustang II, and a 1978 Ford Pinto, to name a few. What was your first car, favorite car, and worst car? Okay, so for me, I was attracted to the Edsel for that specific thing, is that it was just unique. You know, I had been around, you know, when you go to car shows, there's so many cars, and a lot of the cars will be the same, right? You'll see a lot of Mercurys, you'll see a lot of Bel Airs, you'll see a lot of Chevelles, you'll see a lot of Novas, you'll see a lot of T-Birds, you'll see a lot of just, I mean, there's so many, like, and I hate to say it like this because I'm not talking shit, but there's so many, like, generic that you know are going to be there at a car show. And I love generics. There's nothing wrong with classic, original. Like, every time I go, I'm not like I'm saying, I'm not talking shit by any stretch of the imagination. I love all of these classics. But then when an Edsel rolls in, it's so vastly different. And on top of that, I personally feel like late 50 model cars were just like at the heightened of atomic features. So like 58s and 59s for me, when it comes to like styling, I'm such a huge atomic buff, and things like the dashboards and the tail lights and just like the features that were put in aesthetically are just my style. They cater to the things that I love so much. So when I saw Edsels for the first time, it really grabbed my soul. And I think that, like, if you're going to pick a car, it needs to evoke something out of you. And I had loved all the classics that I had seen because they're all so equally beautiful. But then when I saw an Edsel for the first time, I fell in love with it. Like, I was triggered, right? Like, you see these beautiful cars and you're like, oh my gosh, these are so stunning and I love them and they're beautiful and wouldn't it be great to have one? But then when I saw an Edsel, I was just like, oh, I need this in my life. What is this? And so I think, you know, the things that turned people off of Edsels in the beginning are what turned me on. You know what I mean? I think that, like, for Edsels, people, the front grille of the Edsel really was very vastly different for people. And like back in those times, you know, people very much liked to go with what they were comfortable with. And so when you come to the visual aesthetic stylings of things, I think like the front end was just a little much for some people. I don't understand how. I really don't, because I love it so much. And then if you look through like car culture and history, there's so many other vehicles that, like, if you were like, well, you didn't like the Edsel, but why was this okay, kind of thing. But ultimately, you know, Edsels were created in a time to compete with something very specific, and they just didn't measure up to what they were going against. And it fell through. It was a business thing, right? They were created to make money. They weren't making money because they couldn't compete with the market and the demographic that they were being put up against. But I don't really care at this point, because there's people out there who can appreciate that now, and I'm just really fortunate that people have taken care of so many of them for so long, because ultimately that led me to get mine. And not everybody would be that fortunate, you know, like how much longer before certain cars just don't exist anymore because they weren't taken care of, right? The possibility is always there. But with Edsel enthusiasts, there's people out there who can see the art and they fell in love with them like I did. And so we're doing our part to make sure that they stay on the road and that they are continuing to be a huge piece of automotive history as the outcasts, right? There's always going to be rebels and outcasts, and us Edsel owners are them. So on top of that, I don't really think there's anything that I don't like about it. There's not anything that I don't like about it. So I just love them. I think they're unique. I think they're amazing. I think they're beautiful. I think they're one of a kind, and I'm drawn to things that aren't trendy. I always have been. I've always been the person who likes things that are usually not what's in. So to also be attracted to a car that would be considered not in isn't really that shocking to me. My first car was a 2001 Jeep Cherokee. I absolutely loved that car. It was white. It had, bench seats. It was in great condition. I used to drive my oldest around in it all the time. And it was just really easy to drive. And I absolutely loved it. Ultimately, I ended up selling it to be able to buy him Christmas that year. But it was my like favorite car at the time to drive because it was so comfortable to drive. And I had driven my mom's 91 Suburban, and I had driven my sister's, 92 Saturn, and I had driven lots of things randomly, a Tahoe, a Navigator, and I really loved my Jeep. It was just perfect. Favorite car is my Edsel, hands down. Favorite car, hands down. Worst car, for me, I can't really say. I don't really have like a worst car. The car that I didn't like driving, I guess the most that I've driven would have been my boss's jacked up Chevy pickup truck. When I worked at the motorcycle dealership, my boss had, just a huge jacked up pickup truck. It was Oklahoma, like those two, trucks I'm talking about, like where you need a step ladder to get into. And he was like, just take my truck to go pick up my daughter from daycare. And I was like, okay. I didn't like driving it. It's like, I don't like this. It's like driving a parade float. I'm gonna pass. Patricia's screaming, make a penis joke. She's like, Emily, say you couldn't fit in the truck because your penis was too big. So sorry. The other question, car related, was from Martin, and he says, who or what inspired you to work on old vintage cars? I think it's just in my genetics. So when I was born, my dad had a 1964 Mustang, and it was his baby. My dad is a gearhead. So on my dad's side of the family, my papa and some of my uncles worked for GM. Big into my papa worked for GM, I believe, his whole life. And then my uncles got involved with also working with GM because, that's, you follow in your dad's footsteps, is a common thing. So like automotive grease monkey has always been in my genetics. I come from a family of guys who work on their own cars, fix their own cars. My dad's mechanically inclined. My uncles all were. My brother, his first job was being a diesel mechanic, and now he's still a diesel mechanic. So like working on cars has just always been around, but I can also say that like vintage cars and that type of lifestyle was never really around. So like the automotive, like working on cars, was always just working on whoever's car needed to be fixed, and they were usually newer cars. My love for vintage cars is just solely within myself. I have an uncle who was really into like luxury imports and like fancy vintage cars, like old school, like just like your really high-end luxury vintage cars, not necessarily the same demographic custom culture scene that I'm into, but it's always been around. And I remember my Uncle Bob, he had a Ranchero, this beautiful like hunter green flaked Ranchero that he would pull up since I was born. It was an 80s model, early 80s model. And, so like I remember being drawn to these types of things. And the more that I grew up, and then when I discovered the vintage scene in general, like the custom culture scene in general, and that there was this whole lifestyle around it and rockabilly. It was just, it made so much sense to me because they were things that as soon as I saw them felt like home. Um, and so being around hot rods and cars is just something that my soul has always been perked by, but I wouldn't necessarily say that I've gotten to be involved in it until I was making my own choices into what I wanted to be involved in. And then when I found rockabilly and this whole scene that had all of these things encompassing, it was my home, right? So then, you know, you become a pinup model and you're working with all kinds of cars all the time, and my love for that just kept growing. And car shows and being around hot rods has always been my favorite part of my job. You know, I can shoot on set on a white backdrop all dolled up, but it's not the same as shooting with a classic car or a hot rod for me. And that's always been my favorite part of what I do. And working car shows and going to car shows to be a judge at pinup contests, or just anything that gets me in that environment around old school cars, is soul evoking for me. It just brings me to life. So it's something that makes me very happy. It's a big passion of mine. Working on vintage cars, I never thought I would have the opportunity to, you know, but I never thought that I would ever have my dream car. I've wanted an Edsel for a really long time. But like I was talking about early on in this episode, I have imposter syndrome. I never thought that I would be able to call one my own. You can't have a car like that. You're never going to get a car like that. What would you do with a car like that? But then I got myself into an environment and around people who inspired and believed in me. And now I have my dream car, and I'm also blessed with the opportunity to be able to work on it myself. I don't know what I'm doing. That would be absolutely impostering of me to say I know what I'm doing. I don't. I'm completely new at this. But I think the fact that I have the want and the drive to work on my own car and to understand my own car and to be a huge part of my car's continued history is what makes me capable of it. You know, I'm willing to sit down and figure out the problems. I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to say, hey, can we talk about this so then I can go do it? I am the only person that's worked on my car. Do I have a husband who's like standing there willing to help me figure out what I need to do? Yes, I have a fantastic teammate who's standing with me. But I also have a teammate that says, okay, now you go get the tools you need and you go do it, because it's not my car. So then I'm left to still work it out on my own, which I'm really grateful for, that I don't have somebody that's just like, let me do this for you. Let me do this for you. Because I've had that my entire life with everything that I do. But for me, I had to understand my car. I have to work on my car, so I do. And I have to say, it's probably been my most favorite project that I've ever done. It's way more fun than standing in my bathroom doing makeup. I love makeup, I love art, I love all the stuff that I create, but this has gotten me in touch with a piece of myself that has always wanted to be touched inappropriately, and now it is. So, but yeah, I think that it's in my nature, it's in my genetics, it's in my makeup, and it's something that, because it was there, I sought out, and now I completely and 100% encompass. So it's what makes me happy, and I think that even if you don't know how to always do everything, seek out what makes you happy and embrace it and do that. So that's going to be it for that topic. Now we're going to move on to our next topic of the show, and that is what's with these GD headlines. But make sure, if you want to know more about my car and keep up with her projects, make sure that you follow That's a Ford Edsel Ranger. Yeah. All right, so now we are going to move on to the weird, the wacky,